Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA. First, a word from our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors. Founded in 2004, Affiliated Monitors provides professional, independent integrity monitoring and ethics and compliance assessments nationally and internationally and across almost all industries. With its knowledge of effective ethics and compliance programs and cultures, Affiliated Monitor is respected for its work as the corporate monitor on matters ranging from multinational corporations to small and mid-sized companies and even individuals. Having served in over 750 monitorships, no one has more experience as an independent monitor than the team at Affiliated Monitors. For more information on how an independent monitor can help improve your company's ethics and compliance program, visit our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors, at www.affiliatedmonitors.com. In this episode, we take a look at more commentary on the Walmart case, including the waiver attorney-client privilege issue that came up. Clara Hudson takes a look at how and why the Walmart monitorship issue was decided. We take a look at subcultures and how they can poison your organization. What about the Technique FMC Deferred Prosecution Agreement and some key takeaways? The Serious Fraud Office agrees to a DPA with Serco. France is actually moving towards more DPAs. The CFTC awards two whistleblowers $1 million each for a total of $2 million award. Jonathan Mark explains why skepticism is a key component for any forensic and internal auditor and why too good to be true continues to be a true maxim. We take a look at the first city compliance officer to be nominated to the federal bench, and under the new California Privacy Act, data protection may be a bigger risk as data privacy. It's a fascinating week of compliance and ethics stories. This Week in FCPA is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and now a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back with Mr. Monitors himself, Jay Rosen, for This Week in FCPA, episode 161 for the week ending July 6, 2019, the Happy July 4th weekend edition. So, Jay, as you know, I am back from sunny Paris, and it was an interesting week in ethics and compliance. You want to jump into it?
Sure. Continuing his strong role now that he's on at the Wall Street Journal, we've got an article from our good colleague, Dylan Tokar, talking about privilege dispute in the Walmart probe raises stakes for corporate cooperation, and a legal dispute that arose during the 7-year recently concluded FCPA investigation to Walmart may have a lasting impact on how companies handle future investigations. The dispute led to a ruling by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit in Richmond, Virginia last year that could make it harder for companies to cooperate with the government while also maintaining legal privilege over internal documents. The case centered on the types of agreements companies strike with prosecutors when they decide to cooperate, including making employees available for interviews and sharing documents. Basically, Walmart took a cooperative stance with the Justice Department during the probe, including allowing prosecutors to interview 18 current and former employees. In exchange, prosecutors agreed that any information disclosed by the employees would be covered by legal privilege and remain so. This is the potential sticking point. In exchange, when the Justice Department tried to subpoena one of the former general counsels of a Walmart subsidiary, the company balked, saying the subpoena sought privileged information. Since then, the Justice Department has been more reluctant to make non-waiver agreements. According to Joan Meyer, a former government prosecutor and now a white-collar defense attorney, she said the government has pulled back from entering into these agreements as a consequence. That makes it harder for companies to cooperate with the government and protect legal privilege over documents. So we'll have to see how this plays out, but it just more and more of this information that's coming out of Walmart seems to be very strange and making this a very unusual agreement. That being said, we pick up another story from Clara Hudson over at Global Investigation Review, and she takes a look at the troubled settlement negotiations which led to the monitorship. And many in the FCPA bar have questioned why Walmart was given a monitor when the deal was at odds with DOJ policy. In Clara's article, which we link to in the show notes, she basically speculates that this agreement to have the monitor was negotiated several years ago before Benskowski and the current DOJ leadership became in place. And basically what happened was they are talking about that at the same time Walmart was under investigation, they had an EPA monitor. And part of the reason why this may have worked out is the EPA took such a long time and was dragging its heel that Walmart was not able to take advantage of the Benskowski memo and the new position from the DOJ regarding whether or not a monitorship. So I think people will still be talking about this for a while and trying to figure out the tea leaves. What is your takeaways, Tom?
So it really speaks, Jay, to one issue that you and I have struggled with for many years, which is if you can only look at the publicly available record, and that is in the form of the deferred prosecution agreement or settlement agreement, non-prosecution agreement, whatever it may be. And one thing I've certainly learned is it's only not even the tip of the iceberg, but sometimes the pinprick of the iceberg. So without this report, I don't think there was any way that you or I or the rest of the compliance community would have known about this other EPA aspect. The Department of Justice has been severely criticized for the length of time it took to resolve the Walmart FCPA case, and it turns out, that may have been multiple years because of the EPA. We still don't know the answer to that question. Nevertheless, it does raise certain aspects of justice delayed is justice denied. It was justice delayed for those who were hurt by Walmart's corrupt actions. But Walmart was also hurt because you correctly pointed out that they could not take advantage of the Benskowski memo when they may have been able to because of this sort of pre-existing condition. So I thought it was really insightful. I'm not sure it goes a long way towards explaining the machinations of how we got from A in a torture journey to Z. Nevertheless, it's more information. And I guess it just drove home to me. Once upon a time, a former DOJer, and I think he meant it as a compliment, but I certainly took it as a compliment. He told me that I was the best at interpreting the public record of anyone he knew. And when he said public record, he was clearly communicating to me that, Tom, you don't know diddly about what the real story is. So, but that's what we're stuck with.
So next up, we're going to take our weekly turn with the coolest guy in compliance. What has Matt Kelly steamed up about CBP and subcultures?
So, Jay, this relates to the concentration camps on the border now between Texas and Mexico, where the Trump administration is separating families and putting people in these camps, sort of all of the negative information that's come out about the treatment they're receiving. And then, lo and behold, it turns out there's a subgroup or a group, rather, at the Customs and Border Protection that had a Facebook group replete with racist, sexist posts about migrants and Democratic politicians. At one point, they showed there was a picture of the Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, allegedly performing a sex act on Donald Trump as he forced himself upon her. So anyway, you get the idea of how distasteful these posts were. But Matt uses it to talk about the difference in culture versus subculture. And he points out that employees will develop their own subcultures, and occasionally they're provide chronic illness and chronic corruption to the entire organization. And I certainly think that this is a situation here where you've got clearly a group within the Customs and Border Protection who has delegitimized the basic humanity of those trying to cross the borders into the United States. Basically called the father and daughter father and son who drowned as floaters in the Rio Grande. And you've got to kind of monitor this within your organization, because if you do have this, it can literally infect your entire organization. And it's going to be, of course, incumbent on the Customs and Border Patrol to actually do something about this.
Yeah, really disturbing. Next up, you decided to shine your spotlight with a 3-part series on the recent Technique FMC deferred prosecution. After diving in for 3 episodes, what are the takeaways that you have, Tom?
So just a couple, Jay, because I think this has been fairly well explored, but regarding the bribery schemes themselves, with Technique, they were bribing or paying bribes in Brazil, or rather for Petrobras contracts. And in most of the situations, Petrobras was in on the bribery scheme. And so they would either overcharge or undercharge and then divert monies to Swiss bank or other money laundering jurisdictions to pay the corrupt officials. So it drives home the situation that compliance professionals are being forced to face, which is what happens when your customer is corrupt. And that's just typically not something that compliance programs are designed to deal with. You're designed to deal with corrupt third parties, not corrupt customers. And so the techniques utilized by banks in basic know your customer analysis, I think, is going to become more important. Also, the use of joint ventures here. Keppel Offshore created a joint venture with Technique with a specific purpose to pay bribes. Is your joint venture valid? Is its business justifications and the business that it does any way present any business rationale for going forward? And in this case, it didn't. And then from over on the FMC side, Technique and FMC merged in January 2017. So that's why it's Technique FMC. But we had the anomaly of both companies had FCPA investigation going on before they merged. FMC was paying bribes in Iraq, to get contracts with the Iraqi energy company. And in reading, it was, I don't want to say standard, but fairly routine bribery schemes involved, cash, much lesser amounts that were paid in Brazil. But the thing that struck me, Jay, was the continued request for money. So Technique would pay one level of bribes, and inevitably there would be some other reason pop up why a bribe had to be paid. A new person was reviewing the file and he needed to be paid, or a new issue had come up and there needed to be an additional payment. These payments were not large. I mean, they could have been as low as $5,000 or up to $50,000. But once you subject yourself, once you show that you're willing to engage in bribery and corruption, you're now criminalized. And now we're just negotiating over the price. And Technique had to continually go back to the well to pay more bribes. And it just shows once you start paying bribes, you're going to be subject to being extorted for more bribes, literally all the way through and even after the contract is signed. So yet another reason not to engage in bribery and corruption, this time from the business perspective.
The SFO actually agrees to a deferred prosecution agreement subject to court approval with a company called Serco Graphics Limited. We're linked to 2 sources in the show notes. One is a very comprehensive look at this by James Thomas from Global Investigations Review. And then we also link to the press release from the Serious Fraud Office. Basically, Serco Geographics Limited has agreed to a preliminary £19.2 million settlement with the SFO to resolve allegations that are participated in a scheme to mislead the Ministry of Justice. The SFO confirmed that it has agreed to this 3-year prosecution. The DPA was initially approved by Mr. Justice William Davis at Southwark Crown Court in London. The SFO said it will ask Davis for final approval on the 4th of July. If the judge approves, SGL will pay a fine and an additional £3.7 million to cover SFO legal costs. Serco said the amount was halved due to the company's full cooperation and the fact that it had self-reported. The company reported the misconduct in November of 2013, a month after the SFO launched its investigation. In a statement, the SFO said it had agreed to the DPA in principle because of the company's prompt and voluntary disclosure, its substantial cooperation, and significant remedial efforts. If agreed, this DPA will be the fifth that the SFO has secured since agreements became available in the UK. The other four agreements include those signed with retailer Tesco, engineering company Rolls-Royce, anonymous company XYZ, and Standard Chartered Bank. Lawyers have previously told Global Investigations Review that the DPA system has several flaws that need to be ironed out. The SFO has been under fire since individuals under investigation in the Tesco matter were acquitted. And we have a quote from Jessica Parker at Corker Benning in London, and she said the announcement is a significant milestone for SFO head Lisa Ozovsky because despite the SFO's early successes, the rationale for agreements has been seriously weakened by recent cases. Tom, your thoughts?
So, yeah, I guess, Jay, what struck me about the article was not so much the DPA, which was agreed to and reported, but just the withering criticism of the SFO. They've taken it on the chin. This dropping of the Rolls-Royce case is in the face of Rolls-Royce actually agreeing to a DPA is almost unexcusable. Of course, the Tesco case, you had the individuals acquitted where the company had agreed to a DPA, and you frankly have to wonder why any company would agree to a DPA other than that they're just getting out of something at a relatively low cost. So whether the SFO can follow this up with anything significant is, in my mind, still an open question.
Agreed. Next up, we've got our second Dylan Tokar article of the morning. This comes to us from the Risk and Compliance Journal and the Wall Street Journal. France moves towards U.S. model by endorsing corporate-led investigations. French authorities are encouraging companies to conduct internal investigations when seeking to settle allegations of certain financial crime. This latest in the series of reforms that brings France closer to the U.S. model of corporate crime and punishment. Recent guidance explaining how such investigations can help companies secure negotiated settlements was released last week by France's financial prosecutors and a new anti-corruption agency. Without a way to strike out-of-court deals with corporations, French prosecutors have traditionally brought them to trial. It's been a real fight at the death at every turn, said Kevin Abakoff, a white-collar defense attorney at Hughes, Hubbard & Reed. French authorities now say corporations that discover potential violations should cooperate by conducting internal investigations and sharing results with investigators. In 2016, France adopted the anti-corruption law known as Sapin 2 that required French companies of subsidiaries of certain sizes to maintain compliance programs. And this created a new anti-corruption agency in France, the Agence Française Anti-Corruption, the AFA. So basically, we've seen within the last year that there's been further cooperation between French prosecutors in the U.S. This is specifically underlined by the Société Générale settlement. And then the new guidance lays out in detail what France's financial crimes investigator, Parquet National Financier, and the AFA call a CJIP. So that's basically equivalent to the deferred prosecution agreement. And what we're going to need to see now is if they actually build in a mechanism to either have not only the DPAs, but whether or not there's going to be, the concept of a monitor there in France. U.S. prosecutors sometimes require companies to hire monitors to oversee compliance with the settlement, and in a show of confidence, the Justice Department in 2018 said ongoing monitoring was not required by SocGen under their agreement. So there now appears to be a brotherhood of regulators who are using shared methods and harmonizing the investigative capabilities. So one can only hope that these are continuing steps forward for France to join with the other major industrialized companies who have robust anti-corruption stances. So next up, Tom's going to take a look at the Commodities Future Trading Commission and their recent award of $2 million to two whistleblowers.
So yes, Jay, the CFTC, Commodities Future Trading Commission, awarded two whistleblowers a combined amount of $2 million for providing the agency with significant information that led to the investigation. The award is going to be split evenly because they jointly submitted the tip and the award application. The CFTC called them model whistleblowers because they identified key relationships and explained complex financial arrangements. They were highly informative, and they also provided the same information to another organization within the U.S. government, which conducted a separate investigation and shared its findings with the CFTC. The CFTC's Christopher Ehrman said it often takes integrity and courage to report specific, timely, and credible information about misconduct, and such information enhances our ability to police the markets. So by law, the CFTC protects the confidentiality of investigators, so we don't know the information they disclosed, which might lead to their being unmasked. So an interesting report, and it came to us from Harry Casson over at the FCPA blog.
So next up, something from one of our colleagues who we haven't had too much as of late. Jonathan Marks joins us with a look into Theranos, whether or not it was too good to be true. And I'm sure the facts to this matter are generally known by most people, but I'll give a little quick update that Elizabeth Holmes founded Theranos in 2003 at 19 years old after she had dropped out of Stanford University. She marketed a medical laboratory on a chip by promoting a product that could run hundreds of quick and inexpensive diagnostic blood tests. She recruited a board that included Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, former U.S. Secretary of State, and also Larry Ellison, one of her professors at Stanford, venture capitalist from Draper Fisher Jurvetson, and now Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, and just for good measure, Rupert Murdoch was also on the board. In 2013, Walgreens partnered with Theranos in 2013 without ever allegedly testing the technology. At the time, Theranos wellness centers popped up in 40 Walgreens stores in Arizona. And Walgreens is now a case study of what can happen when an established company that craves growth decides to gamble on an exciting and unproven concern. Things kind of moved along to 2015. The company was valued at $9 billion. And then a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, John Carreyrou, began investigating the company and uncovered a number of red flags and suspicious claims. These discoveries led to additional investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the United States Attorney's Office. It was alleged now that the company had the following schemes to defraud investigators. Holmes and her co-conspirator Balwani made material, false, misleading statements to investors and failed to disclose material facts. They deceived investors through misleading technology demonstrations. They misrepresented their relationship with Walmart and misrepresented examination and validation processes. Jonathan goes on to take a look at fraud Pentagon and says that basically arrogance, competence, opportunity, pressure, and rationalization led to what happened at the company. And unfortunately, a company with such conditions that could become the lead scandal in tomorrow news. So just like Theranos joins the Hall of Shame, including Enron, WorldCom, Adelphia, and HealthSpot, there are basically certain blind spots that a company needs to look at in terms of avoiding a situation like this. So it's a great article by Jonathan, and we link to it in the show notes. I know we've talked a lot about Theranos in the past. Tom, anything else you'd like to add here?
It really demonstrates, Jay, that you have to have skepticism on any business transaction. And there were people at Walgreens who were skeptical of this, and they did want to look behind the curtain. And they were simply removed from the investment team. And when you do things like that, that's when companies tend to get in trouble. Walgreens claims that they were defrauded, and they were defrauded, but a large part of Walgreens' problem really stems exactly from not doing basic business due diligence on something.
So we can't get enough Walmart in the news. Richard Casson comes to us with something else from his blog, and Walmart compliance honcho nominated for the federal bench. What's the story?
So Jay Lee Rudofsky is or I guess he still is, the senior director for global anti-corruption compliance at Walmart, and he's the first sitting compliance officer to be nominated for the federal bench. So all of us in the compliance community need to celebrate this. This is, I think, a very significant development. He clearly is a lawyer, and he practiced at Kirkland and Ellis and a couple of other firms. He's also a former Supreme Court clerk at the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court and a U.S. Court of Appeals clerk. So he's obviously a pretty smart guy. Done, I think, pretty good stuff at Walmart, very well respected, politically savvy, having worked in Mitt Romney's political campaign. But from the compliance perspective, it's great to see a sitting compliance officer nominated to the federal bench.
Great. And our last article right now, we've got a group of contributors from the law firm of Davis, Polk, and Wardell, and their articles entitled "The Biggest Risk with CCPA May Be Cybersecurity, Not Privacy: 10 Things Companies Are Doing to Prepare."
Right, Jay. And I thought this was really interesting because most compliance professionals and practitioners are aware of the California Consumer Privacy Act. Certainly data protection officers in the United States are. And most of the focus has been on data privacy. But this article points out that cybersecurity is equally important because it creates a private right of action for California consumers against companies that have experienced a cyber breach if their personal information is taken by an unauthorized person. The law provides for statutory damages between $100 and $750, and the only viable defense to an action is that a company upheld its duty to implement and maintain reasonable security procedures and practices appropriate to the nature of the information to protect personal information. And the article lays out 10 items that they believe companies should engage in. These are things that Jonathan Armstrong and I have talked about in our Life with GDPR podcast. But it really drove home the point that the California law is, as GDPR is, twofold: data privacy and data protection. And that if you don't have the data protection component as robust as you do the data privacy component, you could open yourself up to some significant breaches. And just think of, the number of consumers at $100 or $750. It wouldn't take much to add up to a pretty significant pot. And if you've got a million or so, that's 750 times a million is a big number, and it could be very costly going forward. So take a look at your data protection as well.
So, Tom, you started a series a little bit earlier this year called Trekking Through Compliance. What are some of the topics that you've discussed recently?
So trekking through compliance, I think everyone who's ever listened to any of my podcasts, Jay, knows that I'm a full-flown Trekkie from the original series, which is the one I grew up with. So this summer, to honor Star Trek, the original series, and the summer, because it's 79 episodes, I'm doing each episode on a daily basis. So you get the story synopsis, a fun fact of trivia, and then some compliance and leadership takeaways. So this week, I wanted to highlight and call out. Monday, I had Who Mourns for Adonais, Tuesday, the Changeling, Wednesday, Mirror, Mirror, Thursday, the Apple, and then yesterday, Friday, the Doomsday Machine, one of my personal favorite episodes. And so if you're a lover of Trek and you'd like to learn some lessons that you might be able to import into your compliance function and impart to your employees, check out Trekking Through Compliance. It's the summer series podcast for you.
So I know you just got back from Paris. Can you tell us what conference you were attending and any takeaways that might be particularly interesting to our listeners?
Sure. I was at Le Cercle de la Compliance conference in Paris, which is a group of compliance professionals literally throughout France. It was a 2-day conference. The first day focused on the compliance profession and the compliance professional. The second day focused on compliance programs, and that was the day I spoke. I spoke on operationalizing compliance, but really a great thirst for compliance professionals in France. As you mentioned, with CEPONDU being enacted 2 years ago, this organization was formed 5 years ago, so it's relatively new. The thirst for increased knowledge and compliance programs is very great among the compliance practitioners in France, much like it is still in Brazil. So I look forward to working with their group. They were a great group of folks. I think we had a couple of hundred people in attendance, so very well attended. We were feted as only the Parisians can do so. So a lot on data privacy, data protection, investigations. Recorded some podcasts while I was over there that will be posted in the near future. So I really thought it was a great opportunity to collaborate with professionals in France, compliance professionals in France. And frankly, I learned some ideas that I'm going to blog about probably on Monday that I thought American compliance practitioners need to think about as well.
Excellent. And then in the coming week, are there any webinars we need to let people know about?
So Jay and I are going to be doing a webinar for and with Conversant, and we're going to take a look at the Evaluation of Corporate Compliance Programs 2019 guidance as it conjoins with the Benczkowski memo. I know Jay and his affiliated monitor colleagues have really talked about the Benczkowski memo as not really a precedent or a precedent even to the 2019 guidance, but really part one. And so we take a look at what Jay and I think many others have come to see is really a two-part process, with the Benczkowski memo being part of the memo is the Department of Justice's own internal calculus about what to when a monitor is appropriate, but also there's quite a bit of information in there about a company when they're under investigation, what they need to do to avoid a monitorship. And obviously the guidance is a best practices analysis and where the Department of Justice currently's thinking is around compliance programs. So it may even be the guidance should be part one. Part two should be the Benczkowski memo. What do you do to remediate when you're in an investigation? And then part three might be the Department of Justice's guidelines around when it makes a decision to have a monitorship. So it's an interesting way to look at this. I know, Jay, I think it's going to be not only a lot of fun, but incredibly useful for the compliance practitioner to see this continuum of thought from the Department of Justice.
So we're looking forward to that later on next week. And another thing, even though it might be the dog days of compliance summer, wanted to announce an event that we're going to have in the Houston area that my colleagues Vin DeCiani and Eric Feldman will be joining Tom for a Houston Roundtable. And again, as we just discussed, they'll be taking a look at the updated DOJ Evaluations of Corporate Compliance Program 2019 and talk about what's new. We'll link to this in the show notes, but the event is going to take place on July 22nd from 4:30 to 6 p.m. at the Good Company Seafood in Houston. So please RSVP to JROSEN at affiliatedmonitors.com, and Tom and Eric and Vin would be happy to see you in Houston and talk compliance and anything else that's on your mind. Tom, there's been a slew of NBA signings and reassignments. Anything on the horizon for the Houston Astros? They don't seem to the Rockets. I don't seem to see their name as acquiring any new guns.
So, Jay, sometimes the best deals you make are the deals you don't make. And I didn't think that the Rockets were broken to start with. And I still don't think they're broken. So I think the Rockets standing pat may have been the best move for them. So I'm looking forward to seeing. It's been a huge shakeup. That's definitely certain. And as recent as yesterday, the shakeup continued with Kawhi Leonard announcing he was signing with the Clippers, and Paul George being traded to the Clippers, giving the Clippers, I think, instant credibility in a revamped Western Division. So it's going to be a fascinating season. If the Rockets can stay healthy, I think they are in the mix as well as anyone to compete for the championship next year.
So some of the pundits are saying, besides the earthquakes and aftershocks here in Southern California, and we hope everyone is safe with that the two other seismic shifts have been those two deals, just talking about Kawhi Leonard and Page. So LA looks like it's going to have a pretty robust NBA season next year between the Clippers and the Lakers. So it'll be nice to see those two franchises being relevant again. So on behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rose, and Mr. Monitor, we'd like to thank you for joining us for This Week in FCPA, episode 161 for the week ending July 6th, the Happy 4th of July weekend edition.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. If you have any questions, you can email Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. I'm at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode, and I hope, Jay, you will join Jay and I again for another wrap-up of some of the week's top compliance and ethics stories on This Week in FCPA. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network, now a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks again for listening.